On the morning of August 3rd, 1944, Feldwebel Heinrich Voss stood in the commander's cupola of his Panther tank and allowed himself a rare smile. Through his Zeiss binoculars, he counted the hulks. 4 M4 Shermans sat burning in the hedgerow-lined field outside San Barthélemy, their olive-drab paint blackening and peeling in the August heat. His platoon had caught the American column in a textbook ambush. The lead tank brewed up with the first 75mm round, the rest paralyzed in the narrow lane between the bocage, picked off one by one in less than 3 minutes. "Wir Tommykoker," his gunner called up through the turret. 4 Tommy Cookers. The nickname had followed the Sherman from North Africa, a dark joke about how quickly American tanks caught fire, how reliably they cremated their crews. Voss noted the kill claims in his log with the satisfaction of a craftsman. Tank 247 of 2nd Company, E-Abteilung, Panzer Regiment 6, had now destroyed 11 Shermans since Normandy. He wrote the date, the map coordinates, and a brief tactical note. Keine Gegenwehr nach erstem Treffer. No resistance after the first hit. They build them to burn, Voss remarked to his loader, a 19-year-old from Kassel named Pfeiffer, who had joined the crew only 2 weeks earlier. 1 round, 1 kill. The Americans have quantity. We have quality. This is why we will hold them. 3 days later, on August 6th, Voss's platoon had repositioned 12 kilometers west to cover a crossroads near Mortagne. Through his binoculars, he watched an American armored column approaching and felt the blood drain from his face. The lead Sherman bore a name painted in white block letters on its turret, Lucky Legs 2. Voss knew that tank. He had killed that tank. He had watched it burn outside San Barthélemy, had seen the flames reaching 3 meters into the Norman sky, had logged it in his book as destroyed. He had seen the crew bail out, or thought he had, yet here it was. The same designation markings, the same unit insignia, the same white name on the same turret, rolling toward him as if August 3rd had never happened. "Das ist unmöglich," Pfeiffer whispered. "That's impossible." But Feldwebel Heinrich Voss was beginning to understand that this word, impossible, no longer meant what German tankers believed it meant. What Voss didn't know, what none of the Wehrmacht's panzer crews could have fully grasped in those chaotic summer weeks, was that they were not fighting an army. They were fighting a system, a vast, tireless, impossibly efficient machine that retrieved shattered Shermans from battlefields in hours, rebuilt them in days, and sent them rolling back toward the front with fresh crews, fresh ammunition, and fresh coats of olive-drab paint. The Germans had been trained to count kills. The Americans had been trained to count something else entirely. Operational tanks, and in this calculation, this mathematics of attrition that would ultimately dictate the war's outcome, the Panther's superior armor and gun meant nothing against an enemy whose tanks simply refused to stay dead. This is the story of why German tank crews learned to dread not the Sherman they faced, but the Sherman they had already destroyed. To understand German confidence in the summer of 1944, one must first understand German doctrine and the mathematics upon which it rested. The Wehrmacht had built its armored forces around a simple, brutal principle: qualitative superiority. A single superior tank, crewed by trained professionals, could defeat multiple inferior tanks. This was not arrogance. It was proven fact, validated across 4 years of combat from Poland to the gates of Moscow. The numbers supported this doctrine with almost religious certainty. In North Africa, Tiger tanks of Schwer Panzerabteilung 501 had achieved kill ratios exceeding 10-1 against British and American armor. At Kursk, a single Tiger, commanded by Hauptmann Heinz Rondorf, destroyed 22 Soviet tanks in a single engagement. The Panther, introduced in 1943, combined the Tiger's killing power with greater mobility and easier production. On paper and on the battlefield, German tanks were simply superior. Oberst Wilhelm Brandt, commanding Panzer Regiment 6 in Normandy, expressed this confidence in a briefing to his officers on June 28, 1944, 3 weeks after the Allied landings. "The Americans have landed with their Shermans," Brandt told his assembled tank commanders. "We have studied this vehicle extensively. Its armor cannot withstand our 75mm at any combat range. Its gun cannot penetrate our frontal armor at any range. 1 Panther is worth 4 Shermans. 1 Tiger is worth 10. These are not estimates. These are the established facts of tank warfare. He was not wrong. The M4 Sherman's frontal armor measured 51 millimeters, adequate against Japanese infantry but woefully insufficient against German anti-tank weapons. Its 75mm gun, the standard armament in 1944, could penetrate only 60mm of armor at 500 meters. A Panther's frontal plate measured 80mm, sloped at 55 degrees, giving it an effective thickness exceeding 120mm. The Tiger's frontal armor was 100mm of vertical steel. The mathematics were irrefutable. A Sherman could not kill a Panther or Tiger from the front. A Panther or Tiger could kill a Sherman from nearly 2 kilometers away. German tankers had a phrase for this: Kanonenrohr Überlegenheit, gun tube superiority. The army with the longer reach, the heavier punch, controlled the engagement, and in the summer of 1944, gun tube superiority belonged entirely to Germany. What the Germans calculated in armor thickness and muzzle velocity, however, they failed to calculate in other dimensions. Major Friedrich Körner, an intelligence officer attached to 47 Panzer Corps, compiled a report on American armored strength in early July 1944. His assessment was thorough, professional, and utterly blind to what mattered most. American tank losses in the Bocage fighting have been severe, Körner wrote. Between June 6th and July 1st, 1st U.S. Army has lost an estimated 300 medium tanks. At this rate of attrition, their armored capability will be significantly degraded within 6 weeks. The Americans cannot replace losses at the rate we are inflicting them. Körner's casualty estimates were accurate. His conclusion was catastrophically wrong. The German officer had calculated American losses against German production, approximately 330 Panthers and 100 Tigers per month by mid-1944. By this arithmetic, the Americans were bleeding tanks faster than Germany could build its own. What Körner failed to grasp, what no German intelligence assessment fully captured, was that American losses and German losses meant entirely different things. When a Panther was knocked out, it was usually destroyed. Germany's recovery and repair infrastructure in France was primitive, overtaxed, and increasingly paralyzed by Allied air supremacy. Spare parts arrived late, or not at all. Skilled mechanics were being conscripted as infantry replacements. A damaged Panther might sit in a Norman field for weeks, awaiting a transmission that would never come. When a Sherman was knocked out, it entered a system. Within hours, sometimes within minutes, American recovery vehicles would reach the wreck. Within days, it would arrive at a rear area maintenance depot. Within a week, it would roll off the repair line, combat ready, indistinguishable from new. The Germans were counting kills. The Americans were counting operational tanks. And in this mathematics, the only mathematics that ultimately mattered, the Wehrmacht was losing an equation it didn't even know existed. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, would later capture this dawning incomprehension in a single observation. We would destroy them in the morning. They would return in the afternoon. We would destroy them again. They would return the next day. It was not warfare as we understood it. It was something else entirely. That something else had a name. The Americans called it battlefield recovery and repair. But to understand how it came to exist, how an army built this machine that turned destroyed tanks into merely damaged tanks, one must go back to the beginning. In the autumn of 1940, a 46-year-old Army colonel named John K. Christmas sat in a cramped office at the Aberdeen Proving Ground and stared at a problem that kept him awake at night. Christmas was not a combat officer. He had never led men in battle, never heard a shot fired in anger. He was an ordnance man, a logistics specialist in an army that had traditionally treated logistics as an afterthought. But Christmas understood something that most fighting generals did not. Wars were not won by the tanks that started battles. They were won by the tanks that finished them. A destroyed tank is a permanent loss, Christmas wrote in a memorandum dated October 14, 1940. A damaged tank is a temporary absence. The nation that understands this difference will build its armored doctrine accordingly. The nation that does not will discover the truth too late. The problem Christmas faced was simple to state and monstrously difficult to solve. The United States was building an army from almost nothing. In 1940, the entire U.S. Army possessed fewer than 500 tanks. most of them obsolete, many of them inoperable. Within 2 years, American factories would be producing thousands of tanks per month, but production was only half the equation. The other half, the half that no one was thinking about, was keeping them running. Christmas had studied the German campaigns in Poland and France with obsessive attention. He noted something that most American observers missed. German tanks broke down constantly. The Panzer I and II were mechanically fragile. The Panzer III and IV were better, but far from reliable. In the French campaign, German armored units had reported mechanical readiness rates as low as 50% on some days. Yet the Germans had won. They had won because their advances were so rapid that breakdowns didn't matter. They captured French fuel, French spare parts, French mechanics. They had won because the campaign lasted 6 weeks, not 6 months. They had won, Christmas believed, under conditions that would never be replicated against a prepared enemy fighting on its own soil. The Germans have built a sprinter's army, Christmas told a meeting of the Ordnance Department's senior staff in January 1941. Fast, powerful, designed for short campaigns. We must build a marathoner's army, an army that can fight for years, across oceans, at the end of supply lines stretching 10,000 miles. That army will not win by destroying enemy tanks. It will win by never running out of its own. From this insight emerged the concept that would eventually be called the maintenance pipeline, a system designed not merely to repair tanks, but to treat repair as the primary function of armored warfare. The system Christmas envisioned operated on 4 echelons. First echelon, the tank crew itself, trained to perform basic maintenance in the field. Second echelon, the company maintenance section, capable of replacing components and conducting minor repairs within hours. Third echelon, battalion and regimental maintenance companies, equipped to rebuild engines, transmissions, and running gear within days. Fourth echelon, rear area depots, capable of total reconstruction, taking a burned-out hull and returning it to combat as a factory-new vehicle. Each echelon fed into the next. A tank too damaged for second echelon repair was evacuated to third echelon. Too damaged for third echelon, it went to fourth. Nothing was abandoned. Nothing was written off. Every Sherman that could theoretically be saved would be saved. "We will recover every tank," Christmas declared in a 1942 planning document. "We will repair every tank that can be repaired. We will cannibalize every tank that cannot. A Sherman destroyed in combat will yield spare parts for 3 Shermans damaged in combat. We will make the enemy kill the same tank 5 times before it is truly dead." The technical specifications of this system were staggering in their ambition. Christmas demanded recovery vehicles capable of towing a 33-ton Sherman through mud, across ditches, over rubble. The M32 tank recovery vehicle was born from this requirement. A Sherman chassis stripped of its turret and fitted with an 81mm mortar for smoke cover, a 60,000-pound capacity winch, and a pivoting boom crane capable of lifting a Sherman's transmission in the field. Each armored division would receive 18 of these vehicles, organized into recovery platoons that followed combat units like mechanical vultures. He demanded mobile repair shops that could travel with advancing columns. The result was a fleet of specialized vehicles. The M7 machine shop truck, carrying lathes and drill presses and welding equipment. The M8 electrical repair truck. The M16 parts supply truck. Its cargo bed organized into hundreds of labeled bins containing every component that might fail in combat. He demanded spare parts in quantities that horrified Army accountants. For every Sherman shipped overseas, the Ordnance Department stockpiled an additional 2.5 tons of spare components. Engine blocks, road wheels, track links, transmission gears, electrical harnesses, stacked in depots from Britain to North Africa to the Pacific, waiting. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Gruber, who would later command the 83rd Ordnance Battalion in France, recalled his first encounter with the system during training at Fort Knox in early 1943. "I had served in the peacetime army. I was used to requisitioning a single spare part and waiting 3 months. Now they were showing me warehouses, mountains of parts. I asked what we were supposed to do with all of it. The instructor just smiled and said, 'You're going to put tanks back together faster than the Germans can blow them apart.'" Not everyone believed this was possible. Brigadier General Alvin Gruber, no relation to Harold, commanded the Armored Forces Tank Destroyer Doctrine Board, and viewed Christmas's maintenance obsession as a dangerous distraction. "We are training mechanics when we should be training killers," he complained in a March 1942 memorandum. "The Germans do not win battles with wrenches. They win with guns and audacity. Colonel Christmas would have us prepare to lose gracefully rather than win decisively." The criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. The Sherman was not designed to defeat German tanks in single combat. It was designed to be easy to fix. Its engine was accessible through a rear deck plate that could be removed in minutes. Its transmission could be extracted without dismounting the turret. Its components were standardized, interchangeable, mass-produced to tolerances that sacrificed maximum performance for maximum replaceability. German engineers, examining captured Shermans, marveled at this philosophy and misunderstood it completely. "The American tank is built like a tractor," wrote Hauptmann Ernst Berger of the Wehrmacht's Technical Intelligence Branch. "Crude, simple, designed for farmers rather than soldiers. Their engineers have sacrificed armor and armament for ease of manufacture. This is the choice of a nation that does not understand war." Berger was half right. The Sherman was built like a tractor. What he failed to grasp was that this was not a weakness, but a doctrine. A deliberate choice that would prove more devastating than any gun or any thickness of armor. By June 6, 1944, when the first Shermans rolled onto the beaches of Normandy, the system Christmas had built was ready. Recovery vehicles stood by in landing craft. Maintenance battalions waited in England with warehouses of parts. Fourth echelon depots were already under construction in Cherbourg, preparing to receive the flood of damaged tanks that everyone knew was coming. The killing was about to begin, and so was the resurrection. The system nearly broke in its first week. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after D-Day, Staff Sergeant Raymond Kowalski of the 743rd Tank Battalion watched his Sherman, nicknamed Pittsburgh Pride, take a direct hit from an 88mm round while advancing through a gap in the seawall at Omaha Beach. The shell punched through the hull just below the turret ring, killing his loader instantly and setting the ammunition storage ablaze. Kowalski and his surviving crew bailed out into waist-deep water as the tank transformed into a pillar of fire and smoke. 30 minutes later, lying in a medical aid station with second-degree burns across his forearms, Kowalski saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. An M32 recovery vehicle attempting to reach Pittsburgh Pride, its treads churning uselessly in the soft sand, its winch cable snapping under the strain of the waterlogged hull. The recovery vehicle itself became stuck. A second M32 arrived to retrieve the first. By nightfall, both recovery vehicles and the burned Sherman sat in an immovable cluster while German artillery continued to fall. "The whole system jammed up right there on the beach," Kowalski recalled in a 1987 interview. "All those plans, all that training, and we couldn't get a single dead tank off a single beach." The chaos of the Normandy landings exposed every weakness in Colonel Christmas's carefully designed machine. Recovery vehicles bogged down in the Norman sand and clay. Maintenance units landed on the wrong beaches, separated from the combat units they were supposed to support. Spare parts sat in cargo holds, while ships waited days for a chance to unload. In the first week of Operation Overlord, the U.S. Army lost 186 medium tanks and recovered fewer than 40. German observers noted the carnage with satisfaction. Oberst Hermann von Sturm, commanding a Kampfgruppe of the 21st Panzer Division, filed a contact report on June 12th that reflected the prevailing German assessment. American tank losses at the beaches and in the immediate hinterland have been severe. Recovery attempts have been observed but appear disorganized and ineffective. Many destroyed tanks remain where they fell. The Americans fight with courage, but their logistics are in disarray. Recommend continued aggressive counterattacks to prevent consolidation. The Bocage, the ancient hedgerow country of Normandy, made everything worse. The dense earthen walls, some of them older than the Norman conquest, channeled American armor into kill zones where German anti-tank guns waited in perfect concealment. A Sherman that threw a track in a hedgerow lane became a roadblock, trapping every vehicle behind it. Recovery vehicles could not maneuver around the obstacle they had come to retrieve. Technical Sergeant William Red Foley, a maintenance chief with the 3rd Armored Division Service Company, described the nightmare in a letter home dated June 29th. "We can't get to them. The roads are so narrow that if a tank dies, everything stops. We've got wrecks stacked up 3 deep in some places. The Krauts just sit back and pick them off, and there's not a damn thing we can do. This isn't what we trained for." The losses mounted with sickening speed. In the 3 weeks following D-Day, 1st U.S. Army lost over 400 medium tanks, a rate of attrition that threatened to cripple the armored force before the breakout from Normandy could even begin. Worse, the replacement system could not keep pace. New Shermans sat in English ports waiting for ships. Ships waited for beach space. Beach space waited for engineers to clear the wreckage of tanks that had died in the first hours. German intelligence tracked these losses with growing confidence. Major Helmut Rössler of Fremde Heere West, Foreign Armies, West, the Wehrmacht's intelligence branch, compiled a weekly assessment that landed on the desks of senior commanders throughout the theater. "American armor strength is declining measurably," Rössler wrote on July 5, 1944. "Current estimates suggest 1st U.S. Army has lost approximately 45% of its initial tank complement. Replacement rates remain insufficient to offset combat losses and mechanical attrition. If present trends continue, American armored capability will reach critical levels within 30 days." The report circulated through German headquarters with something approaching relief. The feared American industrial juggernaut, it seemed, had limitations after all. Tanks could be built in Detroit, but they could not be conjured from thin air on a contested beachhead. German tankers coined new nicknames for the Sherman that summer, each one a small cruelty. Tommy Coker, Tommy Cooker, remained popular, but others emerged. Brennandy's Grab, Burning Grave. Ronson, after the cigarette lighter whose advertising slogan promised it, "Lights first time, every time." The joke spread through panzer units like gallows humor always does among men who deal in death. Lieutenant Klaus Dietrich Weimann, a platoon commander in Panzer Regiment 22, wrote to his wife on July 8th with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was winning. "The American tanks are a strange contradiction. They appear in great numbers but die so easily. Yesterday, my platoon destroyed 4 of them in less than 10 minutes, all with flank shots at ranges under 600 meters. They burned magnificently, one after another, like torches planted in the field. Their crews rarely escape. The vehicles are death traps, poorly designed and worse armored. I cannot understand why the Americans continue to send them. Perhaps they simply have nothing better." What Weimann could not see, what no German could see from the smoke and chaos of the Norman hedgerows, was what was happening behind the American lines. By the first week of July, the system was beginning to function, not smoothly, not efficiently, but functioning. The beach congestion had cleared enough for heavy equipment to move. Maintenance battalions had found their assigned units. 4th Echelon depots in Cherbourg had begun receiving the first batches of damaged tanks, hulks that German observers had counted as permanent kills. And in those depots, men with wrenches and welding torches were performing something that looked very much like resurrection. Captain Eugene Harmon of the 546th Ordnance Heavy Automotive Maintenance Company watched the first wave of destroyed Shermans arrive at his depot outside Cherbourg on July 3rd. 17 tanks, towed on flatbeds and trailers, lined up in his yard like patients in a morgue. Some were burned black. Some had holes punched through their armor. One had its turret blown completely off and resting upside down on the engine deck. "Those Germans think they're killing tanks," Harmon told his maintenance chief, Master Sergeant Frank DiMaggio. "They don't understand what killing means." Of those 17 tanks, 14 would return to combat within 3 weeks. The turretless hull became a spare parts donor, its engine, transmission, and running gear distributed among the others. Only 2 were judged completely beyond salvation, and even those yielded road wheels, track links, and electrical components. The mathematics that German intelligence believed were irrefutable were about to be rewritten. The Shermans were coming back, and when they did, nothing in German doctrine would explain what was happening. But first, the Americans needed to break out of the bocage, and for that, they would need the system to prove itself under fire, not behind the lines, but in the grinding chaos of combat itself. July 26, 1944, the village of Saint-Gilles, 7 kilometers southwest of Saint-Lô. Sergeant First Class Thomas "Tommy" Brennan sat in the commander's hatch of his Sherman Ballbuster 3 and watched the hedgerow line 400 meters ahead dissolve into smoke and thunder. Operation Cobra had begun the previous day with the largest concentrated bombing in military history. Over 1,500 heavy bombers dropping 3,300 tons of explosives on a rectangle of Norman countryside barely 5 miles wide. Now the armor was pouring through the gap. Brennan's tank was the third ballbuster he had commanded in 7 weeks. The first had burned outside Carentan on June 14th. An 88mm round through the sponson that killed his gunner and loader before Brennan could reach the fire extinguisher. The second had thrown its transmission on July 9th during the fight for Hill 192, abandoned under fire, recovered that night, and returned to him 11 days later. He had lost it again on July 19th to a Panzerfaust that penetrated the engine compartment. Now he rode in Ballbuster 3, which was actually Ballbuster 2 rebuilt with a new engine, new tracks, a welded patch over the Panzerfaust hole, and a fresh coat of olive drab paint that still smelled of chemicals in the July heat. The Germans didn't know this. They couldn't know this. To German intelligence, Ballbuster had been destroyed twice, 2 separate kill claims filed by 2 separate units. Yet here it was, rolling toward them for the 3rd time. What happened over the next 6 hours at Saint-Gilles would become, in the dry language of after-action reports, a significant armored engagement. But for the men who fought it, and especially for the Germans who watched it unfold, it was something closer to a nightmare made real. At 0847, Brennan's platoon crested a low rise and immediately took fire from a concealed Panther dug in at the edge of an orchard. The first round struck Iron Maiden, the platoon's lead tank, square in the turret front. The Sherman lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its hatches. Brennan watched 3 of the 5 crew bail out, the commander and the 2 men in the hull. The turret crew never emerged. "Panther, 11 o'clock. 800 meters, Brennan shouted into his intercom. But before his gunner could traverse, a second round slammed into Doris May, the tank to his right. This one hit the hull, just above the track. Doris May slewed sideways and stopped, fire licking from the engine deck. 2 tanks dead in less than 30 seconds. Standard German doctrine. Standard German results. Brennan's platoon scattered into what cover the terrain offered, a shallow depression here, a stone wall there, and began the deadly game of trying to flank a Panther that could kill them from nearly a mile away while they struggled to penetrate its armor at point-blank range. The engagement lasted 4 hours. It cost Brennan's company 6 Shermans, Iron Maiden, Doris May, Cajun Queen, Lucky Strike, Hellcat, and Jersey Lightning, along with 14 dead and 9 wounded. The Panther was eventually destroyed by a combination of artillery and a flanking shot from Brennan's own tank that penetrated the thinner side armor at 200 meters. A German victory by any tactical measure, 6 Shermans for 1 Panther, except for what happened next. At 14:30, with the fighting barely over and German artillery still falling sporadically on the American positions, an M32 recovery vehicle appeared on the rise behind Brennan's company, then another, then a third. They moved with a purposefulness that seemed almost obscene given the carnage still smoking in the fields. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Brandt, a tank commander in a 2nd Panther that had been held in reserve during the engagement, watched through his commander's periscope from a concealed position 1,200 meters east. What he saw, he would later describe in an interrogation report as unbelievable. The Americans did not pause, Brandt testified. The battle had ended perhaps 1 hour before. There were still wounded being carried from the field, and yet these recovery vehicles drove directly to the destroyed tanks, tanks that were still burning in some cases, and began to work. The M32 crews worked with a speed and efficiency that bordered on mechanical. Cables attached, winches engaged, damaged Shermans, their hulls still warm, were dragged from the field with a ruthlessness that allowed no sentiment. Iron Maiden, the first tank hit, was hooked and moving within 40 minutes of the engagement's end. Its turret was destroyed beyond repair, but the hull, the engine, the transmission, the running gear was intact. 4th echelon material. 6 weeks later, it would roll off the depot line in Cherbourg with a new turret, a new crew, and a new name. Iron Maiden 2. Doris May had burned too completely to save, but the M32 crews stripped it anyway. road wheels that could be remounted, track links that could be reused, a .30 caliber machine gun that had somehow survived the fire. Nothing was left. Cajun Queen, Lucky Strike, Hellcat, Jersey Lightning, each one hooked, assessed, and evacuated. By 1730, less than 3 hours after the shooting stopped, the field at St. Gilles was empty of American wrecks. Only scorched earth and scattered debris marked where 6 Shermans had died. Brant watched all of it. He counted the recovery vehicles. He timed their operations. He noted the systematic efficiency, the total absence of hesitation or confusion, and he felt something shift in his understanding of the war he was fighting. "We had killed 6 tanks," he said in his interrogation. 6 confirmed kills. I saw them burn. I saw the crews die. And yet within hours, it was as if the battle had never happened. The field was empty. Our victory had been erased. What Brant witnessed at St. Gilles was not exceptional. It was standard operating procedure. Sergeant Brennan, meanwhile, had been ordered to report to the company maintenance section 2 kilometers behind the line. When he arrived at 1900, he found his maintenance officer, Captain Louis Hendricks, standing beside a Sherman with fresh welding scars across its hull. "Brennan," Hendricks said, "meet Ballbuster 4. Brennan stared. The tank in front of him was Lucky Strike. He recognized the particular dent in the fender, the scrape across the glacis plate where they had sideswiped a stone wall 3 days earlier. It had been hit by an 88mm round and abandoned, burning less than 7 hours ago. "How is this possible?" Brennan asked. Hendricks shrugged. "The round went clean through the hull, in one side and out the other. Missed the ammunition, missed the fuel, missed everything that mattered. Killed Kowalczyk and wounded Peters. But the tank..." He patted the welded patch. "The tank's fine. New periscopes, new radio. Patch the holes. She'll run. 7 hours. From destroyed to combat ready in 7 hours." Brennan climbed into the commander's hatch and ran his hands over the controls. The blood had been cleaned from the interior, but he could smell it underneath the solvent. The copper tang that never quite went away. Kowalczyk's blood. Peters's blood. The tank didn't care. The tank was ready to fight. "The Germans think they're killing us," Brennan said quietly. "They don't understand. You can't kill something that won't stay dead." At that moment, 70 kilometers to the east, a German intelligence officer named Hauptmann Victor Lange was updating the Wehrmacht's tank strength estimates for the American forces in Normandy. His numbers showed that 1st U.S. Army should have been down to approximately 600 operational medium tanks, barely enough to sustain offensive operations. The actual number was 1,247. The resurrection had begun, and the Germans were only beginning to understand that the rules of armored warfare had changed. August 1944. The breakout from Normandy became a rout. American armor poured through the gap at Avranches like water through a shattered dam. 3rd Army under Patton racing south, then east, then north, encircling the German 7th Army in a pocket that would become known as the Falaise Gap. And everywhere the Americans advanced, the system advanced with them. Recovery vehicles followed the spearheads at distances that would have been suicidal for any other support unit. Maintenance companies leapfrogged forward, setting up shop in captured French villages, working through the night under canvas tarps, lit by hissing gasoline lanterns. The depots at Cherbourg operated around the clock, 3 shifts of mechanics cycling through an endless stream of damaged hulls. The numbers told a story that German intelligence could not reconcile with their own observations. Between July 25th and August 25th, 1 month of sustained offensive operations, 1st and 3rd U.S. Armies reported 648 medium tanks destroyed or damaged beyond unit-level repair. In that same period, those same armies received 793 tanks from the replacement stream, 417 new vehicles from England, and 376 rebuilt tanks returned from the depot system. The Americans were gaining tanks in the middle of the most intense armored combat of the war. General Major Heinrich Eberbach, commanding Panzergruppe West, stared at intelligence summaries that made no sense. His panzer divisions had claimed over 500 Sherman kills in August. American tank strength should have been collapsing. Instead, aerial reconnaissance showed more American armor on August 20th than on August 1st, more tanks after 3 weeks of brutal combat than before. There is an error in our methodology, Eberbach wrote to OB West headquarters on August 18th. Either our kill claims are dramatically overstated or the Americans possess reserves we have not identified. I request clarification. No clarification came. There was none to give. The claims were accurate. The reserves did not exist. What existed was something German doctrine had never contemplated, an army that refused to subtract. The psychological effect on German tank crews accumulated like poison. Feldwebel Heinrich Voss, the same Voss who had watched Lucky Legs 2 return from the dead outside Mortain, survived the Falaise pocket through luck and desperation, escaping east with the remnants of his company in mid-August. By then, his war diary had taken on a different tone. August 14th. Destroyed 2 Shermans this morning at range 800 meters. Good hits, both burning. This afternoon, engaged what I believe was the same unit. I recognize the tactical markings. They had 4 tanks. 4. We had killed 2 this morning, and they had 4 in the afternoon. I do not understand this war anymore. August 17th. Petrol shortage. We have been stationary for 2 days, unable to move for lack of fuel. American tanks pass on the road to our north, perhaps 3 kilometers distant. I count them through my binoculars. I count for 1 hour. I stop at 200. They are still passing. An endless column. Where do they come from? We destroy them, and they multiply. August 21st. Lieutenant Pfeiffer asked me today how many Shermans I have killed since Normandy. I told him 31 confirmed. He asked how many I have killed twice. I did not answer. I think the number is higher than I want to know. The abundance was not limited to tanks. What broke German morale was not just the Shermans that kept returning. It was everything else that came with them. The vast, impossible, wasteful wealth of the American way of war. Oberleutnant Erich Sommer, captured near Argenton on August 19th, was transported to a temporary POW collection point behind American lines. What he witnessed there left him, by his own account, unable to speak for several minutes. The collection point had been established in a captured German supply depot, a depot that had been considered well stocked by Wehrmacht standards, containing perhaps 3 days of ammunition and fuel for a single division. The Americans had not even bothered to inventory it. They had simply pushed the German supplies aside and filled the depot with their own. There were pallets of ammunition stacked 3 meters high, Sommer testified. Crates of rations I could not identify. Luxuries, I later learned, chocolate and cigarettes, things we had not seen in months. And the fuel, thousands upon thousands of jerry cans, stacked in rows that stretched beyond my sight. A sergeant was using a can of petrol to clean grease from his hands, using petrol as a solvent. I had seen men executed for wasting fuel, but it was the maintenance area that shattered Sommer's remaining illusions. Behind the supply dump, American mechanics had established a field repair station. Sommer counted 18 Shermans in various states of disassembly, engines removed, transmissions extracted, turrets lifted by mobile cranes. The mechanics worked with a casual efficiency that suggested this was routine, ordinary, boring even. One Sherman sat with its entire engine deck open, the power plant hanging from a crane boom. A mechanic, a boy who looked no older than 19, sat on the hull eating a sandwich while his partner finished disconnecting the final hoses. In the German army, Sommer said, an engine replacement required 3 days and a dedicated maintenance company. These Americans were doing it in a field, with a crane mounted on a truck while eating lunch. I watched them complete the replacement in 4 hours. 4 hours. Then they started the engine and drove the tank away. It had been combat damage that morning. By evening, it was returning to the front. He paused in his testimony, struggling for words. We thought we were fighting an army. We were fighting a factory that had learned to move. The contrast with German maintenance capabilities grew starker with each passing week. By late August, Panzergruppe West reported operational readiness rates below 30%, not from combat losses, but from mechanical breakdown and lack of spare parts. Transmissions failed and could not be replaced. Engines wore out and sat waiting for rebuilds that never came. Track links snapped and immobilized vehicles that were otherwise combat ready. A single statistic captured the disparity. In August 1944, the entire German panzer force in France received 297 replacement tanks. The American depot at Cherbourg alone returned 412 rebuilt Shermans to service. The Germans were losing tanks faster than they could build them. The Americans were repairing tanks faster than the Germans could destroy them. Hauptmann Werner Ostendorf, a company commander in the 116th Panzer Division, recorded an encounter in late August that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His company, reduced to 6 operational Panthers from an original strength of 17, had established a defensive position covering a crossroads near Elbeuf. On the morning of August 26th, they engaged an American armored column attempting to force the crossing. "We destroyed the first 4 Shermans in quick succession," Ostendorf wrote. "Good shooting, clean kills. The column halted. We waited for them to withdraw, as doctrine suggested they should. They did not withdraw. Instead, the Americans did something Ostendorf had never seen. Recovery vehicles appeared within 20 minutes. 20 minutes. The battle was not yet over. We were still exchanging fire, and they sent recovery vehicles forward under fire. I watched them hook cables to a burning Sherman while machine gun rounds struck the ground around them. They did not stop. They did not take cover. They simply worked." 2 of the 4 destroyed Shermans were dragged from the road within an hour. The American column reorganized. Fresh tanks moved forward. Ostendorf could not tell if they were new arrivals or repaired vehicles from earlier in the day. The attack resumed. By nightfall, Ostendorf had destroyed 11 Shermans. He had also lost 4 of his 6 Panthers, 2 to flank shots, 1 to mechanical failure, 1 to an artillery strike that detonated its ammunition. His company held the crossroads, but he had 17 tanks worth of victory and 2 tanks worth of army. "We won the battle," he wrote. "We won every battle, and we were losing the war. Every day we won battles, and every day there were more of them and fewer of us. It was not warfare, it was mathematics, and the mathematics were against us. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and inescapable. A destroyed Panther was gone forever. A destroyed Sherman was merely a temporary inconvenience, and the Americans were only getting faster." The final accounting of the American maintenance system reads like scripture, a litany of resurrection that defies the logic of attrition warfare. Between June 6, 1944 and May 8, 1945, U.S. forces in the European Theater of Operations reported 6,138 M4 Sherman tanks destroyed or damaged beyond unit-level repair. By every conventional measure of armored warfare, this represented a catastrophic loss, more tanks than the entire German panzer force deployed on the Western Front at any single moment. Yet on VE Day, American armored divisions in Europe fielded more operational Shermans than they had possessed on D-Day. The depot system had returned 4,621 tanks to combat, vehicles that German gunners had destroyed, that German intelligence had counted as permanent kills, that German doctrine insisted were gone forever. 75% of every Sherman lost in combat came back. Some came back twice, some came back 3 times. A handful of hulls, patched and welded and rebuilt so many times that nothing remained of the original vehicle, except the serial number stamped on the frame, came back 4 or 5 times. The 3rd Armored Division, the Spearhead Division that had led the breakout at Saint-Lô and the drive across France, compiled statistics that captured the system's full scope. Between July and April, the division reported 648 tanks completely destroyed and another 700 damaged seriously enough to require depot-level repair. Total losses, 1,348 tanks. Total tanks actually removed from the division's rolls as irrecoverable, 148. A survival rate of 89% for damaged vehicles. An effective kill rate, from the German perspective, of barely 1 in 10. Master Sergeant Frank DiMaggio, the maintenance chief who had served under Captain Harmon at Cherbourg, kept his own informal records throughout the war. His notebook, preserved in the National Archives, contains a single page dated April 30th, 1945, summarizing his depot's output. Tanks received, damaged, 2,847 tanks returned to service, 2,411 average repair time, Moderate damage, 8.3 days average repair time. Severe damage, 22.7 days. Tanks cannibalized for parts, 436 parts yielded per cannibalized tank, sufficient for 2.3 repairs, AVG. Below these figures, DiMaggio had written a single annotation. We killed every tank 5 times. It wasn't enough. The men who had mocked the Sherman, who had called it a Tommy Cooker, a Ronson, a burning grave, were forced to confront what that mockery had cost them. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, the commander of Panzer Lehr, who had watched his elite division ground to fragments in Normandy, was captured in April 1945 and subjected to extensive interrogation by U.S. Army intelligence officers. The transcripts of those sessions reveal a man struggling to articulate a truth his training had never prepared him to accept. We were taught that the destruction of enemy equipment was the path to victory, Bayerlein told his interrogators. Destroy enough tanks, enough trucks, enough guns, and the enemy cannot continue. This is fundamental. This is the mathematics of war. He paused, according to the transcript notation, for nearly 30 seconds. The Americans did not accept this mathematics. They rejected it. They built a system, I do not know what else to call it, that made destruction meaningless. We would destroy a tank in the morning. It would return in the evening. We would destroy it again. It would return again. I told my officers, we are not fighting an army. We are fighting an industrial process that happens to be armed. When asked what single factor most contributed to German defeat in the West, Bayerlein's answer was immediate. Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks, your workshops, your welding torches. We tried to destroy your army. You simply replaced it faster than we could destroy it. There is no doctrine to defeat this. There is no tactic. You cannot kill what refuses to die. Oberst Hermann Balck, who had commanded panzer forces in both France and the Eastern Front, offered a more analytical assessment in a 1954 interview with U.S. Army historians. The Sherman was not a good tank. Let me be clear about this. It was not a good tank in the way that soldiers measure such things. Its armor was inadequate. Its gun was insufficient against our Panthers and Tigers. Man for man, tank for tank, we were superior. He leaned forward, the interviewers noted, his voice hardening. But war is not fought tank for tank. It is fought army for army. And your army understood something we did not. That a tank is not a weapon. A tank is a system. The crew, the ammunition, the fuel, the maintenance, the recovery, the repair, all of it together. We built magnificent weapons. You built a magnificent system. The system won. Perhaps the most damning admission came from an unlikely source. Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored doctrine, the architect of Blitzkrieg, the man who had written the book on tank warfare, addressed a gathering of former Wehrmacht officers in Munich in 1952. His speech, preserved in fragmentary notes taken by an attendee, contained a confession that would have been unthinkable in 1944. We believed that quality would defeat quantity. This was our doctrine, our faith, our pride. A tiger was worth 10 Shermans. This is what we told ourselves, and the kill ratios seemed to prove it. Guderian paused, witnesses recalled, and removed his glasses to polish them, a habit from his command days when delivering difficult news. But the Americans did not send 10 Shermans to fight one tiger. They sent the same Sherman 10 times. They sent it in the morning, and when we destroyed it, they repaired it and sent it in the afternoon. When we destroyed it again, they rebuilt it and sent it the next day. We were not fighting 10-to-1 odds. We were fighting infinity-to-1 odds. We were fighting an enemy that could not be diminished, and against such an enemy, quality means nothing. The reunion fell silent. These were men who had believed, who had fought and bled and watched their comrades die for the principle of German technical superiority. To hear Guderian admit that the entire doctrine had been flawed from its foundation was to confront a truth that invalidated years of sacrifice. Our mistake, Guderian concluded, was measuring victory in kills. The Americans measured victory in operational tanks. At the end of every day, they counted how many tanks could fight tomorrow. We counted how many tanks we had destroyed today. They were fighting the next battle. We were celebrating the last one. This is why we lost. The statistics confirmed what the veterans admitted. In June 1944, the Wehrmacht deployed approximately 1,500 tanks and assault guns on the Western Front. By May 1945, that number had fallen to fewer than 200 operational vehicles. German tank production had actually increased over this period. Factories turned out over 8,000 Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer IVs between D-Day and VE Day. But losses outpaced production by a factor of nearly 4 to 1. Every tank destroyed was a permanent subtraction. In the same period, American tank strength in Europe grew from approximately 3,000 vehicles to over 11,000, despite combat losses that, on paper, should have crippled the force 3 times over. The difference was not production, it was not tactics, it was not courage or training or leadership. The difference was resurrection. The Americans had built an army that could not be killed, and against such an army, the finest tanks in the world were nothing more than expensive coffins. Feldwebel Heinrich Voss survived the war. He was captured on April 18, 1945, near Magdeburg. His final Panther, the 6th he had commanded since Normandy, abandoned in a ditch with a broken transmission and no fuel. The tank that had once represented the pinnacle of German engineering sat immobile and silent, killed not by American guns, but by the absence of a spare part that had been on back order since February. In the POW Processing Center, Voss was interviewed by a U.S. Army intelligence officer named Captain David Horowitz. The interrogation transcript, declassified in 1978, captures a man whose understanding of the war had been fundamentally transformed. "How many enemy tanks did you destroy during the war?" Horowitz asked. 47 confirmed, Voss replied. Perhaps 60 in total, including probables. "And how do you feel about that record?" The transcript notes a long pause before Voss answered. "I feel that I destroyed the same tank 47 times. I feel that I was fighting ghosts. I feel that everything I was taught about armored warfare was wrong." Horowitz pressed him. "Can you explain what you mean?" "In training, we learned that destroying an enemy tank was a victory, a permanent victory. The tank was gone, the crew was gone, the threat was eliminated. This is what destruction means. Yes, something is destroyed. It no longer exists." Voss shook his head slowly, the transcript notes. "But your tanks, they did not accept this. I destroyed them and they returned. I destroyed them again and they returned again. By the end, I began to wonder if I had ever truly destroyed anything at all. Perhaps I was only inconveniencing them, delaying them. Every kill I claimed, every burning Sherman I logged in my book, none of it mattered. None of it lasted. I was not fighting tanks. I was fighting a tide. And you cannot kill a tide. You can only drown in it." The interview concluded with a question that Horowitz asked almost as an afterthought. If you could go back to the beginning, to June 1944, what would you tell yourself? Voss's answer was recorded verbatim. "I would tell myself to stop counting. The counting was meaningless. They were not keeping score the same way we were. We counted the dead. They counted the living. And there were always more living." Heinrich Voss returned to Germany in 1947 and spent the rest of his life as a mechanical engineer in Stuttgart. He never spoke publicly about the war, never joined veterans associations, never attended reunions. His son, in a 1994 interview, recalled that his father kept a single photograph on his desk. Not a picture of his tank or his crew, but a clipping from an American magazine showing the maintenance depot at Cherbourg. He would look at it sometimes, the son said. "I asked him once why he kept a picture of an American factory. He told me, that is not a factory. That is the reason we lost." The legacy of the American maintenance system extended far beyond World War II. It fundamentally rewrote the calculus of mechanized warfare, establishing a principle that every modern military now accepts as doctrine. Logistics is not support, it is strategy. The army that can sustain itself longest will defeat the army that strikes hardest. The Sherman tank, mocked by its enemies and often maligned by historians, was never meant to win battles tank against tank. It was meant to win wars, wars of attrition, wars of endurance, wars measured not in kills, but in presence. And in this mission, it succeeded beyond anything its designers could have imagined. Colonel John K. Christmas, the ordnance officer who had built the system from nothing, retired in 1953 as a brigadier general. He gave few interviews and wrote no memoirs, but in a 1961 letter to a military historian, he offered a single reflection on his life's work. We did not build better tanks. We built a better way of thinking about tanks. The Germans asked, how do we destroy the enemy? We asked, how do we remain? In war, the answer to the second question matters more than the answer to the first. The side that remains wins. Everything else is details. On the morning of August 3rd, 1944, Feldwebel Heinrich Voss had stood in his Panther's cupola and smiled at 4 burning Shermans. Wir Tommy Coker. 4 Tommy Cookers. 4 easy kills. He had written in his log, Keine Gegenwehr nach erstem Treffer. No resistance after the first hit. He had been wrong. The resistance was not in the armor. It was not in the gun. It was not in the crew or the tactics or the courage of the men inside those burning hulls. The resistance was in the system, the trucks and the welders and the warehouses full of parts, the mechanics who worked through the night, the recovery vehicles that drove into fire, the depots that turned wreckage into weapons. The Germans built tanks to destroy, the Americans built tanks to return, and in the end, that made all the difference.